I'd be very curious, what would you consider the major inspirations for the Stormlight Archives?
So Stormlight is a little harder for me to trace than some others. Because of that, I'm going to go watch the film of Last Airbender for you.
No,
because not the original.
Bring me all your elderly!
Are you the Avatar Ong?
A while ago, I was fortunate enough to sit down with Brandon Sanderson to talk about inspiration and writing and world building, and if I look a little wired in this interview, not entirely there, it's because I had basically been awake for what felt like 24 hours straight by the time we sat down. But with Wind and Truth, the final book and the first arc of the Stormlight Archives, his epic fantasy series coming out today, I thought this would be a really good time to show you our conversation, because Brandon is a really powerful and positive force in the fantasy and writing space, and I think he has a lot of breadth and experience and wisdom to bring to the table, and I love that he is so open to talking with others about that. And by the way, I'm not being paid to say this. I'm not being paid to promote this book or the series. He doesn't even know this video is coming out now. This is purely of my own volition.
Welcome. I have a very special guest with me here right now. The one and only Brandon Sanderson.
Hello.
Hi. And
I flew to New Zealand and I brought my entire house. That's why we're filming in my lair.
Yeah.
In New Zealand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's actually quite remarkable because, you know, in New Zealand, we don't have lights or internet yet. So you brought over this technology.
Yeah, you just rub some sheep together, the static
it's
electricity
the static
glows.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's how we get our power
Yeah.
most of the time, all like running on treadmills
Yeah.
and stuff. So thank you very much for bringing new technologies here.
Yeah, no problem.
So for people who might not know you,
Yeah.
which is maybe perhaps impossible these days.
Oh no.
But
I always say, like, you get humbled very quickly in public because, you know, someone will be like, "Oh, you're a writer." I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "What have you written?" And I'll say, "Oh, have you heard of this?" And I'm like,
No.
"Have you heard of this?"
No.
You heard of the Wheel of Time? It has a television show? No. Like, all right.
Fantasy's insular in its own way.
I like to say that I'm very famous with a very small group of people.
Yeah, yeah.
But I write the Stormlight Archive, the Cosmere, Mistborn, wrote the last 3 books of the Wheel of Time, and various other science fiction, fantasy things.
Yeah. And I'm not being paid to say this, but Yumi and the Nightmare Painter has just kind of dropped along with a bunch of other books, and it's fantastic. And you should definitely check it out.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're here today to talk about inspiration.
Yep.
You know, there's the old line that the best writers steal, I think it is. I don't know who said it originally, but
it's like good writers borrow, great writers steal.
Yeah, that's right. And we're constantly taking in things from the world, from the books we read, from the films we watch, from the shows we like, and incorporating them into our works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes us a little neurotic sometimes when we realize what our inspirations are, because we are in a, you know, I think all professions are creative, but we're in what are defined as creative professions, right? As writers. And we have this issue where we think, if my story is like anything else, then I haven't been creative.
Yeah.
Therefore, I will get very, very anxious if my story is too much like anything else. I felt this. I assume you have. It's really common for writers that this, like, we must create something out of nothing that is
totally
like,
original. Yeah. I think a part of that comes from, we tend to, or at least this is how it is for me.
Yeah.
I will read something, watch something, and I will have this burning, like, I wish I made kind of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, I had this with Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer when I first read it. I had it with Stories of Your Life by Ted Chiang.
Yep.
Like, these stories, which they just completely mesmerized me, and I'm like, I want to write this. So I wrote stories clearly inspired by them, you know? But
man, 2 of the best science fiction writers in the world right there.
Yeah.
You're starting at the top with your influences there. But yeah, and my early works that were fortunately unpublished were really, really derivative. And you get really worried about that, right? But there is a balance there. Like, we do want to be original. We want to add something to the discussion. We don't want, and it's a valid concern to be like, I don't want to just retread what's happened. But at the same time, human beings, the way that we are creative is by combining things. That's what we do. That's, unicorns, horse, horn, bang, unicorn. We can't imagine a color we haven't seen. We can't imagine a flavor we haven't tasted. We can say it's like this meets this, and then boom, that creates so much for us. And so as a writer, one of the things you have to do is both manage your neurosis about not wanting to ever have anything show its influences and acknowledge that you have these influences, but walk this line of what can I learn from the things that I love without just doing another copy of it.
Yeah.
We already have Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. We don't need another Annihilation.
No.
It's been done, but we sure could use a ton more books that have the same sort of emotional and psychological impact that Annihilation has.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think the thing that sort of, there are ideas and tropes which resonate with us for a reason and appear in a myriad of forms over and over. And so much of writing is about kind of telling the same story in those tropes and those ideas, but bringing to it some element of your own personal journey, your own personal perspective.
Absolutely. You mentioned Yumi and the Nightmare Painter,
Yeah.
And your kind of original why you wanted to talk to me about this is it has some very direct and obvious inspirations. I would list Final Fantasy X, Your Name, the film, and Hikiro no Go, which is a manga. I have not read a lot of manga, but Peter, my editorial director, worked on an English translation of that. And to support him back in our days in college, I read it, and I'm like, oh, this is really fun. And so, my inspirations are, I can point to and say, okay, this is where I was as a mindset when I was working on this story. And it's really interesting to do this, to be because as a writer, what I like to do is I like to say, all right, what did I love?
Yeah.
Right? And can I take that essence of it out? Can I pull it out and say, okay, this glowing thing, this is the thing that I loved. And it can be separated from all the rest of this if I can just use that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we focus a little bit too much on plot being taken, or characters. For me, in Story of Your Life, what I loved was this very sci-fi concept, but immediately kind of juxtaposed, placed alongside with. If you don't know, Story of Your Life is the film Arrival. You might have seen Arrival.
And if you've seen Arrival, you can still read the story because it's
so different in some way, but so similar.
But yeah, they did it with Arrival. This is a perfect example because Arrival is it gives you the same emotion, but it's almost opposite of the story. What's going on in the story? And it's amazing.
I mean, I don't want to give spoilers, but what you know about the daughter in the story is very, very different. But I loved that you had this really intimate story placed inside a sci-fi context. And I was like, that's the part I love, And I love the discussion of linguistics and stuff like that. But I realized I'm attached to this kind of setup of kind of sci-fi, but very intimate, very close, very, very small. And in Yumi and the Night Painter, in kind of contrast to a lot of your other works, it's a very intimate story.
Yeah, I approached, when I was writing Yumi, one of the things that was going on is I thought, my wife had been reading a lot of romance novels. And I approach romance from a very kind of several different, you try to do lots of different things in your books, but mostly I'm looking at romance, I'm like, I want to do it like my real life lived experience, myself and my friends, which doesn't look a lot like a romance novel.
Yeah.
It looks like people muddling through messy relationships and not being sure and trying to figure things out. And it's a lot less of kind of some of these things that happen in romance stories. But that doesn't mean those experiences aren't valid because some people do have that experience, right? And beyond that, I've never had the experience of saying magical oaths and making a magic sword appear. And you know what? I really like reading about that stuff. It's like, there are certain things that a story that even if it uses a little bit more romance tropes, I shouldn't even say even, when it uses more romance tropes, gets at a truth that is different from we muddle through it and it doesn't feel like romance novels. These are both truths. They're just different types of things. And so I'm like, what is it that I love about a romantic story? And why does this speak to me? Can I write? And part of that was the smaller scale. If you have just such enormous scale, you can do all sorts of cool things with that. But it also means certain other types of stories just don't fit within that as well. And I wanted to scale back. I want to say, can I write a story in the Cosmere that is a normal book length instead of 4 times or 2 times the book length, that also is more about a character relationship? And that's what I really, really want to do. And I love, so what I took from your name, it's pretty obvious, is one of the inspirations, because your name is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, if they're watching your channel, they've seen your name.
I don't think I've ever mentioned your name.
Haven't you?
No. But it is a gorgeous film.
It is just amazing. Yeah. And what it is, to not give too many spoilers, is the story of 2 people who have to live each other's lives. Through certain magic or science, they swap places. Actually, a very common trope in a lot of Japanese storytelling, I've found. And I like that. It was really interesting, forcing people to live each other's lives. But in your name, they don't get to interact. It's like they fall in love with each other's lives more than with each other, which is really fascinating. It's really cool, and it does lead to some intimacy that could never happen in another type of story.
It's so heartbreaking.
It's so amazing. I'm like, all right, what if you had to sit there with the person living your life and try to coach them to?
It's kind of this glass bottle kind of
exactly. And that was the seed that I got from that. But Final Fantasy X. It's my favorite Final Fantasy. And what I love about it is people doing fantastical jobs that feel mundane to them, right? What jobs would we have in a fantasy world?
We so often focus on like big world building things, but you've got this exterminator in a fantasy world, and it's such a lovely concept. Terry Pratchett does the mundanity of like a magical world so much.
Absolute king of that. And it's something that, again, in these grand scope novels, when you're dealing with the kings and the knights and things, or the revolutionaries or whatnot, that you don't have time for. I'm basically a magical exterminator. I hadn't even put that together. That's kind of what he is magical exterminator.
I think you say it in the book. I think a magical. Oh, maybe it was said at the book club. But I mean, it's that kind of job. I think another element of inspiration when we're sort of taking things from other works is like the writing style that we bring to an idea can be very different to what the original kind of work is. I was reading Hilma Wolitz's "Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket." It's a short story.
I haven't read it.
I tend to just pick up books randomly that I've never seen and pick them. Short story collections are great for that. But she has this just really crisp writing style and a really lovely idea, a lovely way of looking at the mundane. But every single line just feels, she makes the mundane feel magical and feel just completely out there to what it normally is. It paints a beautiful picture. And that style of writing really inspired me. And so, I sort of practiced that a little bit. And the more you practice kind of styles that you've read and that you've seen, the more it becomes your own, the more it evolves because you're incorporating other people.
And the more conscious you are of your influences. Being conscious of your influences is a way to get away from this sort of paranoia that you're going to accidentally just write something that's been written before, which the more professional you get, the less you have to worry about it. The more you practice. Like this is a thing that happens to all of us with our first book. They're very derivative. Usually our second story or whatever stops being so, right? Like you get out of that very quickly. You find your voice. And even if you have echoes of the things that inspired you, that's okay because you're now part of the dialogue. You're part of the discussion. You aren't just rehashing, you're adding who you are to it. And this happens really naturally. But if it is something that worries you, you can consciously say, all right, What if I did something more like this? What if I did something more like this? What could I bring to this?
And I actually think it's like a practice thing, like just being like, I love this style, I love this kind of work, and then trying to create something which is consciously like it, is a really great practice, because suddenly as you're doing it, you kind of go, all right, I think I can apply this to something more original. I would be curious of your thoughts on, should you read books in your genre? Because I've sometimes heard people say, don't read books in your genre, you'll unconsciously take things from it.
No, I think you absolutely should.
I totally agree.
I think if you're worried about it, your genre, all genres are so broad that you can find something very different from what you're writing, and then you don't have to worry about the unconscious influence as much.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like the unconscious influence, we are a bundle of unconscious influences.
Absolutely.
This is where every idea that you come from, if we had like a magic wand, we could trace exactly how it evolved in your brain from something you saw once.
Yeah.
And so it's inevitable. Yeah. And if you don't read in your genre, you're never gonna, you're gonna be one of these people who calcifies into writing in a certain way, and the genre will move on.
Yeah.
And you won't change with it. And I just think that's kind of a sad thing, right? I think we all want to be evolving and getting better and continuing to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, and I've found writing short stories just massively great for that, because you get to so very quickly, short stories and novellas, you get to so quickly do something different, and different style, different concept, and you get to learn, even though you get to sort of take a lot more inspiration very quickly and deal with it and learn from it.
My one major award in a writing category is for when I did that with The Emperor's Soul, where I said, I just need to write something very different from what I'm writing. I want to practice writing something very different. And went and wrote a story that takes place in one room, basically, when, I tend to have these big, sweeping, grand epics. And it was, things came together for that story. And it ended up winning the Hugo, right? And that's because I did some short fiction that was very different from what I was writing otherwise.
And then you get to apply those skills in other projects.
You do.
I'd be very curious, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, but what would you consider the major inspirations for the Stormlight Archives?
So Stormlight is a little harder for me to trace than some others, because pieces of Stormlight came from all over where I was. I would say the most obvious one is Dune.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like a lot of my generation, a story about a world where
the environment is so important. Also, kind of this. I mean, the Shadow Plains are kind of deserty in a way.
Yeah, well, and it's also this kind of person versus nature.
Yeah.
As a fantasy or science fiction in Dune's case, plus magical currency. Right? You've got a magical resource that you use for the magic. Is very Dune-esque.
Dune is also Herbert's his kind of whole thing is the power of the mind, right? Which is, there's a little bit of that in Stormlight, right? Kind of the power of the spirit and willpower and willing things.
There is a bit of that.
Yeah, I don't know.
That one I wouldn't look as intentional. I definitely look at, when I read Dune, I'm like, all right, I want my worlds, fantasy worlds should be able to do more like science fiction in that, right? It's fantasy should be able to do anything. And so why is fantasy always kind of doing some of these same worlds? And that Dune was part of that. Another one, you're gonna be surprised by this one.
What?
Watchmen.
Watchmen.
Have you read Watchmen? You familiar with it?
I've watched the film, and
Okay.
I know the differences with the comic.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I know that sounds like a crime. It sounds like a crime.
Because of that, I'm going to go watch the film of Last Airbender for you.
No,
because not the original. The film is totally acceptable.
Okay.
It's actually a good match to Zack Snyder, and the ending of the film is better. Everything else is better in the graphic novel, but his ending is superior.
Right.
But Watchmen. One of the mind-blowing things about Watchmen when I read it was that Watchmen includes what we call ephemera. You finish a comic of Watchmen, and at the back of it is the advertisement in-world for the figurines that one character has licensed the likeness of another, and the notes that he's written on it about, well, this and this and this, and the next one has a section from a character's autobiography in complete prose, no graphic component, and like each of them had a piece of ephemera, we call it like in-world lore that was not a comic book. And I read that and I'm like, oh, this is so cool.
It's like meta levels there.
This is so cool. All right, I need to do that, but with my art. Because I'm doing the book, and so we're going to include the artwork. Stormlight Archive, and I can give you one more.
Yeah.
I can give you one more. It is Hollywood's flashback system, specifically used. Have you ever watched the old Highlander TV show?
I'm sorry. I'm basically TV illiterate.
It's old. Did you watch Lost? Okay.
No,
it's okay.
I was young when it was sort of
No,
airing.
there's too much good media. So both of these do a thing that in Hollywood, which is the start with a story and then flashback to the character to answer a question.
Yeah, I've seen that 1,000 times. Yeah,
yeah,
no,
and
totally.
I didn't see that a lot in epic fantasy, and so I started each character in Stormlight with a big question, and each book flashing back to give you how they got to the beginning of the first book.
Which is clearly done very effectively.
Yeah, thank you. So there's 3 inspirations for you, but when you start combining these inspirations, that's one way to make it like,
It transforms it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you very much. It's been an honor having you here.
It's going to be hard to get my house back to the States, but I mean, we got several helicopters. We'll just cart it across.
Aircraft carrier coming across the Sanderson empire. No, it's been good. And go and get some of the Cosmere books. They're truly phenomenal. It's an incredible project in the works, and it's going to continue for a long time, and it's going to be amazing.
And do you mean the Nightmare Painter stand alone in the Cosmere?
Don't
need to have read anything else?
Actually, where would you start? Who would you?
It depends. If you have viewers who really like something that's more inspired by something like your name, then Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is a great place. Otherwise, Mistborn is usually the best place to start. It kind of does everything that I do kind of in one package. That's
what I've heard.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
But I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I certainly did, as wired and out of my mind as I was. And this year I've actually made more of an effort to read more of his books, on my phone of all things, because while I'm traveling, I am unable to have physical books with me. As sad as that is. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I'd love to hear about your thoughts. What are you most inspired by? How do you find originality, and where do you draw your inspiration from? Let me know down in the comments below. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.